This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, welcome to episode 99 of A Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda, and it is Good Friday, so happy Easter, everyone. Hope you guys have a great weekend, a great holiday. And I want to talk about the episode today. We had Dr. Sharon Jones, and she's the founder and CEO of thedot.consulting and founder of the Dottie Rose Foundation, which is an organization to help girls get involved in technology with coding camps and things like that. And she's located pretty close to me here in Charlotte, and our paths crossed based on some mutual friends and through LinkedIn. And we had a great conversation. We talked about all kinds of things, including how to improve problem solving, how to teach kids more about coding, and how to get people involved in coding. We talked about resume writing. We went all the way through the different things about how Dr. Sharon Jones got started in technology, why her passion's in technology. We also talked about an organization called Carolina Women in Tech that she's a part of. It was just a really good show, really good episode. And she has a podcast called The Lady Tech Charmers, which I encourage you all to check out. Even if you're not a lady, you can still check it out and listen to some of the great guests that they've had on. Anyway, it's a wonderful episode, and give it up for Dr. Sharon Jones. Sharon, what are some advice that you have for geek leaders like me that have kids that we want our daughters to get involved in tech and we want to help out? How can we go about doing some things like that?
Thanks, John, for having me on the show, and I look forward to chatting more about this. And that's a great question, and I get that question quite a bit. And the first thing that I would say is leverage what your daughter is already interested in. Tech touches every part of our lives, and you and I both know this as leaders in tech and geeks in tech, that it's a part of everything we do. So whatever it is that your daughter may enjoy, and it could be a sports, it could be artistic, it could be culinary, whatever it is, start there. Start with their passion and then add the tech in.
Yeah, that's really good advice. We went to it was something like Daddy Daughter's Halloween thing at Google Fiber a while back. And it was great because she got to do some of the Halloween crafts that she likes, but then also, jump on a Chromebook and do a couple of little games that were coding related, which is pretty awesome.
Right. And here's the thing, at a young age, if you can start working with your child to computationally think or to problem solve, that is the core of being able to be a good technologist. Because when we're working with tech, the key part of technology is that it is a machine, is an extension of who we are as humans. The technology is there to help us do things better, but it doesn't always do exactly what we want it to do, right? It doesn't have complex brains like we do as humans. So problem solving is a very important element in any success of being able to develop, code, use, exceed with technology. So thinking back to even you guys going to doing crafts, if it was something that she hadn't done before, she automatically went through that computational thinking process, which there's 4 pieces to it, where you decompose, you pattern match, you abstract, and then you create an algorithm. So whatever that craft is, we do that very quickly and automatically in our brains. So it's preparing your mind to be able to process through the concept. And then if you take that skill and hop on to the Chromebook and start playing a game, you're doing that process again. You're just doing it in a little bit of a different way, which also probably allowed her to be able to solve or play the game on the computer because she'd already warmed her brain up by creating something using her hands.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it was also it was fun for me too, to go in there and get to play around and learn that stuff too. And I was really surprised that there wasn't more people out there because we're both in Charlotte, North Carolina. There's a lot of tech in Charlotte, and I was just kind of surprised there wasn't. I don't know if maybe the marketing wasn't as good or what we could do better.
We struggle still. There's such a cultural mindset around tech. And there's still a male-dominated perception around technology. And let's be true, there are pieces of it that are very, sit behind a computer, you wear a sweatshirt, and you're just coding all day. I mean, that is an element of technology. And for females, that's not necessarily something that we gravitate to. but that's only a part of, there's so many different pieces that we can do, but it still is a struggle. That perception is still there. And I think girls still struggle trying to figure out, okay, well, where do I fit in this whole world of tech? Because most of what has been put out there is around gaming or, like I said, sitting behind a cubicle coding. And that's part of it, but not all of it.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's been a lot out there, and my wife works in tech. She's actually she heads a PMO, so she's a product manager or project manager. She'll get mad at me for when she hears this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they do. There's a differentiation between the two of them. Yeah.
Yeah, but she's in tech, and that's one thing she notices. Like she's mentioned several times before that she's the only female direct report to their CTO at the moment.
Yes, and that's very normal.
Yeah, it is, and it's surprising to me, but yet also I don't know what to do about that. As a leader, I try to do, some things like whenever I get a resume, I have HR remove, the name. So I don't even know who it's from. So that way I can't make any, biases of gender, race, ethnicity, or anything like that. I want to look at their skills and see what they have. But then in some of my episodes, back in October, I did like a whole series of women in tech. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to Michelle Dennedy. She's the chief privacy officer at Cisco. And she gave me this piece of advice about, well, even if you do that, that's step one, but you've got to also understand that, there's a difference sometimes in how men and women will write things down and how we'll communicate. And sometimes you'll see a man will say, I led this project, whereas a woman may say, I worked on the project team.
Yeah.
And one sounds more powerful. So as a man, you may gravitate to that, but you need to dig deeper. And that's been a hard thing for me to try to do. But I've been working on it. Do you have any other tips when it comes to hiring someone or how we can get past some of these biases that we have?
Well, she's exactly spot on, because we as females tend to want to check every box. That's mm-hmm. one thing that we have been working on within my organizations and in any of the organizations that I'm a part of, is providing women the empowerment to write, I led the project, and not just say I was on the team, because we want to make sure everyone feels uplifted and not as much as just we have a hard time showcasing ourselves. So the best advice I can say, and this really goes to the applicant, is to really, truly write down what you did. What did you do on the team? And if you were a part of the team, what was your role and how did you excel in that role? Mm-hmm. And if you led the team, then right, you led the team. And then as a employer, I think that when you're reading through it, you probably are already beginning to see a little bit of the nuances between the way a male may approach it or a female. One thing that a female does really well is very thorough and thoughtful about the way they write out their information, and has a lot of empathy and can see things from different perspectives. And you probably will begin to, I'm guessing you probably already noticed that some on your applications. They will write through, if they put that they were on the team, you may want to dig in a little bit more about why they just put they were on the team and what their role was. But for the applicant, I would suggest, and I've been encouraging the young ladies that I mentor to add in what their role was on the team, not just that they were a part of the team.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And it's, it's just one of those skills that it isn't really taught much in school, about how to write a proper resume. I know we did resume writing when I was in college, but even today when I teach part-time at Winthrop University, and I'll be looking at some of our digital design students' resumes when they're getting ready to graduate, and I'm like, this is terrible. What people are teaching you how to write, resumes from the 1980s. That's not the skills that I'm looking for when I'm looking for a resume. I don't want to see a bullet list of, languages that, I want to see what you've done with these languages and how to apply them, and what things have you done that separate you from the crowd. And that's one of the things I haven't seen taught as much as I would like to see.
Well, that's good to know, because I do some part-time teaching as well. And even with the young people that I work with, that's a good piece of advice, because I often tell them that if they cannot express what they have done, then what they have done doesn't really have meaning. So being able to write in that manner. And here's the other piece to this. Just like you were saying, if you want to be successful, no matter what your career is, even if it's in technology or wherever you're driven, to be able to write well and communicate is very important. So those fundamental skills of being able to write a good sentence is the same thing you need when you need to learn how to write a coding language. But I like what you just said, because I've said this a lot to my students. Don't just tell people the language that you're doing, tell what you did with it. And then people kind of get stuck. But what I have encouraged my students to do is to volunteer and use their skill set in some fashion. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a job. It could be their work within, if they're a part of the Girl Scouts, or if they're a part of a church or a religious organization, or if they're a part of a soccer team. How can they use their skill set to do a project around that? And then that's something that they're able to discuss on their resume.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think people forget about the extracurriculars that they do, but those are so important. And not even, when you're starting your career, but even later on in your career.
Yes.
One of the reasons we have a friend in common, and I'm going to give her a shout out. She'll probably get mad at me for this, but I don't care. Louise Suggs. And I hired her a couple of years ago as an IT manager for one of my teams. And one of the reasons I hired her, her resume was fantastic.
She's amazing.
She did really well. Yes, she is. But one of the things that stood out for me was the things she was doing outside of work.
Yes.
And when I see that someone is involved outside of work and they're passionate about something outside of work, that carries over and that means something. And that's important versus someone who, you can't see what they do. You can't see anything about them. And she had stuff on, about the things that she volunteers at and some other items that were important. And those little pieces just kind of help build up her character. Even before I met her, I kind of had an idea of what her character was going to be like. And that helped bump her up where, if it was just, work experience, maybe I didn't interview her. I don't know. But because of all these other things, it definitely got the interview and got it started. Yeah,
I agree. And here's the thing about that is that she was well-versed and volunteered in different elements. If you are somebody who feels like they may not be technically savvy or excuse me, or have a little bit of apprehension about adding in technology into your daily career or your daily practices. Think about where you volunteer or where you do things and where you're using technology. So I say this, for example, let's say I've been working with Girl Scouts. Okay. But so let's say that you are a mom of a young lady in Girl Scouts. You can use data to help increase their cookie sales by just running some simple numbers. Well, if you can do that, then you can put that part on your resume to say that's in addition to me volunteering and being a part of my community, I'm also learning to leverage my skill set with data and help my young people be able to sell more cookies because we know that Thin Mints are the most popular cookie.
Yeah, that's really good. And when somebody puts something like that, then it shows that they are thinking about how to apply technology to solve problems, which is what that's what us IT leaders need. We need people that can solve problems, not somebody that can just write code. We want somebody that thinks, that can can
because then you can take that problem solving skill and apply it to any language, whatever language that is applicable that you may need. If they show that they can problem solve, just like with your daughter, if she can problem solve, she can learn any language. You can learn to do anything if you have the core skill set of being able to work through a problem and not give up. It's so easy for us to give up and not continue to plow forward whenever we get frustrated. And I don't know about you, John, but for me, a lot of what I see of why I don't see even young people in general following through in the tech field is they give up really easily if the code doesn't work. And you and I both know that it hardly ever works the first time. You have to at least do it 2-3 times before you figure out A, that you forgot a semicolon, or B, that wasn't the proper logic that you needed to solve whatever it was you were trying to get the code to do.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, there is a lot of giving up that goes on when it comes to technology. And, part of it just because I think there's this mindset of, I'm not good enough because my code failed and their code didn't fail. But they don't realize that, their code did fail like 4 or 5 times in the lab.
Right.
But they didn't show you the part that failed. They show you the part that succeeded.
Well, we were talking a little bit about Louise and Louise we just a moment ago, and I was thinking about when I am a K-12 career and technical education teacher by trade. That's what I spent the better part of my career doing. And I started teaching SAS programming, which is a data analytics platform. SAS is also a company. It's located in Cary. But when we were given the software, we were given a hard download. So we were to download it to the computers. Well, working within the school system, there are some restrictions about how we can do that. As an educator, I didn't have administrative rights to do that. And we couldn't actually send it through the network because the software needed to be downloaded. At that time, we weren't in the cloud per se yet. That was just coming up. This was 10 years ago. And so Louise and I had to figure out a way in which we could download this software and make it work on our network by downloading the software and then creating a line of code. Well, really, it was more of like a directory line so that the students could be able to run the software and still direct it to the correct folder or map it to the folder that we needed. And I remember we spent hours trying to figure out how we were going to make this work. And I'm so proud because we wanted to give up for sure, but we kept plugging away and plugging away and plugging away. And finally we figured out what to do. And we ended up creating this amazing opportunity for our young people where not only did they have the software, but then we were able to do all these really cool projects that help influence our school. One being around busing. At the time, we were here in Charlotte, the magnet school program, there was something called busing. Well, y'all know what busing is, but the students were bused. And then when the economic crisis happened, we were shifted to what we call satellite busing. And it caused a pretty big shift within how we were going to be recruiting students to come to our school. And because we had worked so diligently to create and get this software loaded, the students were able to create a survey, leverage it, and run analytics on all around the satellite busing and went to the school board and presented. It was really phenomenal. But I say that because we could have given up really easily and said, we just can't do this. Mm-hmm. But we worked and figured out a way to download it and create that mapping code. And it was fantastic. And I remember thinking then, oh my gosh, this would have been, if we hadn't done that, I remember sitting when the kids were presenting and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't be sitting here and these kids would not have had this opportunity.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a great example of how, you may have even more or a better outcome than you expected if you just keep trying.
Right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many languages you know, but I do know that once I learned
English, and that's it.
English, that's it.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, programming languages, but for me, once I learned one, I could learn another one. And even now, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in all of them, but I just keep working at it.
Yeah, I remember when I was managing a web and development team, our primary coding language at the time was PHP, and we had a new CIO that just came in and he said, we're shifting everything to .NET. So we picked up and started learning .NET, and that was a big shift, a big difference. And some people said, well, no, I'm a PHP developer, I'm quitting, I'm leaving. And okay, see you later. But the ones that were able to make that shift, even though most of my team were kind of young and that was their only real language at the time, the ones that did make that shift and understand that, I can do this with any language now.
Yeah.
Later on, we picked up Java because we became our mobile development team. So we started doing Android development. We started doing iOS development. They picked up, Xcode. They started using Xcode and learned Objective-C and then Swift and, got into all these things. And it was easy for them to pick that up because they realized that, a language is just another tool in the toolbox.
Right.
I know how to use tools.
Mm-hmm. And every language has a core set of concepts. So no matter, and this is the other piece I was going to say too, when you're thinking about working with your kids in regards to introducing them to computer science or STEM, which STEM sort of bothers me because we do STEM all the time, every day. We are science, technology, engineering, and math on a regular basis. So when you're thinking about that, the core concepts that are around computer programming include understanding what a variable is. So whenever you can figure out that you're going to use a variable to plug something in and out with, and you could use this if you're teaching them how to eat a properly balanced meal. If you need to have a meat, a vegetable, and a fruit, okay, those are our variables. And how do we trade those out to create a balanced meal for every meal so we're not eating the same thing every day?
Yeah, that's a great example.
Right. And that's an easy way to introduce students to kids for them to understand that that's a variable, that it changes based on Fruit is is the overall container. And then what do we change out based in that fruit category for what we want? And so you have a variable, you have something called a loop, and that's where we repeat something. And kids understand this very easily. If you don't, multiplication is an excellent example of a loop. You don't add 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 in your head. You say 1 × 10 or whatever. That's a loop. It makes things easier. So, and we could go on and on. I could give you all the examples because I get you want to talk about geeking out, John. I can geek out hard on this, but I'm so passionate about people understanding that you're already emulating and doing technology concepts yourself. That like you said, the technology is just a tool, and we're applying what we do every day to have the machine help us do it better.
Yeah. My kids learned about loops, I think, through their iPad and YouTube.
Yeah. I'm absolutely playing the same song. And I always differentiate between, something like a do loop where it's going to be based on a condition versus the for loop when you're going to only do it for so many times. I'll ask my kids to brush their teeth, to brush 10 times. They get that. And they'll loop it for, that kind of thing. And that makes it a little bit easier for them to comprehend, so that when you do start looking at something like Java or JavaScript and you see that language for or do, it's not so foreign and overwhelming.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think part of that is just how you communicate, with your kid. If you want them to kind of learn some of those things, you can say, while you do, continue to do this until this happens.
Oh, yeah.
And just, that's always helpful. Oh, one of the things that I wanted to bring back, because we kind of skipped it, but I want to find out how you got so passionate about technology and women in tech. What's your story? How did what's your background to getting involved in technology, and what drove you to making this your passion?
Oh man, John, how long do we have? Well, let's start. Well, let's start with the point that, so I really, this was never where I thought I would be, and actually I don't even know if I could look back what I thought, but the first example that I can give you is I grew up I'm an 80s baby. I grew up in the 90s. The internet came into play when I was 11 or 12. I remember so clearly when the Panthers came out, they had a website and it came up on TV, and I was like, oh my gosh. And we got a computer when I was a senior in high school so that I can complete my senior exit project. That was a big to do here in Charlotte. So got my first email address when I went to UNC Chapel Hill as a freshman. And I can still remember to this day when I was a sophomore at Chapel Hill, and I was in a communications class, and our professor asked us that we needed to do our presentation in PowerPoint. And I turned to the person next to me. I said, what's PowerPoint? I had not had exposure to that. So I'm giving you a little bit of that background because I did not grow up as a technology native. It was not something that was available to me even in my home. I had other friends that used Apple that had different games and things on it, but we didn't necessarily have it in my home. And I did not know that was something that I was interested in. Fast forward a little bit, I graduated from Chapel Hill and I went to East Carolina to do my master's in education. And I decided that I would do business and information technology, mainly because I thought that I would do something around marketing. Ended up doing some student teaching in eCommerce, which at the time, which still is web development around creating an eCommerce business. But in that same time frame, I was posed with, I needed to take a programming class. And it was visualbasic.net, which you mentioned a little bit before. And I had a book. I had my computer. At that time, I had formulated to be able to receive a laptop from the school and floppy disks. And I taught myself visualbasic.net. And I remember when I was able to turn the light bulb on and off, when I'd mastered binary code, that I thought I was the queen of all things programming. I ran around up and down the stairs and I was screaming. I'm like, oh, I did it. And it was so liberating because it had been hard and I didn't really understand what I was doing. And I was really teaching myself because it was an online class at the time. ECU was one of the first schools to really predominantly put out there online learning. That was in 2002. And it wasn't really prominent. Well, and maybe it was across in other parts of the country, but in North Carolina, there was not a lot of this online learning piece. And ECU was really paving the way for that. But the reason why I note that is when I learned how to turn that light bulb on and off, it triggered something in me. And it made me realize that I had the ability to really do something with programming and tech, because what I ended up doing was associating turning the light bulb on and off with literally turning the light bulb on and off, relating it from what was happening on the computer to what I was doing physically. So, meaning I literally went over to the light switch and I was like, okay, so if this goes up, what happens? And if this goes down, what happens? Okay, how can I translate that to the computer? And so over time, what began to develop was I innately began to create projects and thoughts around how can I relate what I'm doing in my everyday life physically to what we're doing on the computer. And that's what began to transcend into my passion for technology and learning how to do different languages and how they applied and why. And I really found my sweet spot when I started to work on my doctorate and began to work more with the data. And I realized the power behind understanding the numbers and realizing that I was actually really, really good at math. But for some reason, I had never felt that way. I think I told myself I was bad at math, but I never was. I always did fine in math. It just took me a little longer than everybody else to do it. But that's really how it happened. I found myself figuring out a little bit here and a little bit there. And the other piece that also really turned the tide is once I got the light bulb to come on and off, when I went back then to learning more about HTML through eCommerce, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so nifty. I can code and then I get an immediate result by seeing it. This is fun. What else can I do with this? And that's when I love to shop and I love to cook and I have all those girly things, or I put quotation marks around it, that are considered that. And I just started taking things that I love to swim. I'm a big swimmer. So I created 10 different websites about swimming because it was something of interest to me. And then when I started coding, I noticed myself getting lost in figuring out how to put up on the screen what I wanted to showcase about swimming.
Yeah.
So that's really how it happened. And then the kids started telling, when I started teaching, they would say, well, hey, can we do a website about such and such? And I would say, yes, of course you can. Or, hey, can we collect data on whether or not people are actually liking the homecoming themes? I don't know. In high school, do you remember everyone would always complain about, I don't want to dress up like a twin and whatever the homecoming week themes were. So we just collected data on it. And you know what? They changed the themes.
Yeah. Cool. Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah. It's fun.
And you're teaching kids that they can make a difference by, just proving a point with data, collecting data, understanding it, and you can make a difference. I think that's just really good stuff.
It's powerful. And the reason why it's powerful is because, and here's one part that I also want to iterate, is that once I understood that I could fundamentally work with and understand the core of programming, I could apply that to any language. Once I learned how to program in SAS, I already knew the basic syntax and I could keep it current by changing the data.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that a lot of young developers kind of forget about, and they don't really think about that. Once you understand that core concept, you can extend to almost anything.
Yes. I mean, let me say this. There is this magical thing, and I don't know if people know that much about it, but it's called copy and paste. You heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Okay. Right.
And most developers use that. That's the first part of code reuse.
Yes. I'm like, don't reinvent of course when you're learning, you have to practice it, but let's just give data, for example. Once you learn that core understand, like, there's certain, I'm gonna relate it back to like SAS or SQL or any of those. There's some core queries or procedures that you do pretty regularly when you're running data. All right. Mm-hmm. And once you write those or do those, there's no reason to reinvent them. Copy and paste it and then change out what you need to do in order to run a new set of data. So it's just like creating a macro in Excel that's going to do something faster for you. The same thing happens in anything else that you wanted in any other programming language.
That's a big part about how I learned to code with JavaScript is I would find things in JavaScript that I liked on the website, view source, copy the JavaScript, and then edit it. And then that was how I learned, a lot of stuff. Yeah. But it's also, in going back to one thing you were talking about when you relate your code to real life on and off, when I first learned about if statements, every video game that I saw, it's like, oh, if I push A, then the guy jumps. If I push B, he punches, and I kept thinking that in my head. Is like, oh, these are so simple now. It's like a light bulb just went off and I understood it all in a different, form and fashion. And then when I learned loops, I was like, oh, this is just a loop. I can see what's happening here.
Exactly. And it makes things easier. I love that you said that. That's to relate it to gaming. I say that a lot about, even with my children. I have 2 boys and they're 7 and 4. And I'll say to them, if you clean up your toys, then we're going to go and get ice cream or whatever it is. I mean, I like what you said earlier about using that vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And I've been tried to be more thoughtful about it, even, with my own children and using that, especially the if statements, because that is very real to them. Ice cream is very important in our household.
Yes. I found that way. I have an 8, 5, and 1-year-old, and food is the most important thing to them, followed closely by their iPads, I believe.
Yes. Well, and here's the thing. If you can relate the content relate programming concepts to what they like, it just makes it so much easier. And like you said, you enjoyed playing the video game. The light bulb went off as soon as you could see the relationship. And that can happen with kids too.
Yep, absolutely. And I believe that does happen it can happen with anybody, honestly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. I just mentioned children because we talked a little bit about it. And one thing I will say this before we move on, but with children, their brains are learning so much at this time, especially when they're in that under the age of 10 or so. They are learning. So it's a really lovely time to introduce them to things like coding, computational thinking, engineering, where they're tinkering and playing with things because they're not scared to fail and they'll keep trying until they succeed. And that is really important as you move through your career or as they grow older, no matter what they decide to do. If they can understand that they can learn and keep trying until they succeed, they're going to be successful no matter what.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I find the same thing with sports. You want to, in my opinion, I want to get my kids involved in sports just so they can see that things are hard and you need to push through it and try hard to get through it. And not, and then I also try to relate that, a lot of sports is mental and it's thinking about the problem. What is your problem? What are your constraints? Well, your constraints is if you want to move the basketball from one side to the other, you either have to dribble it or you have to pass it. So those are your 2 things you have to do. So which one of those 2 things will get the ball to the other end the fastest? And, try to think about it that way.
Right. And you're doing math skills and you're doing STEM right then. And even if you say, okay, let's see if you could even time it, let's dribble it and see how fast it is and record it. Or I don't know what's the other way. Oh, pass it. How fast does that take? Right. And you could write it down and that's data and just compare the 2 and say, all right. So now you're even mentally applying it. And then you're also applying a problem-solving technological skill set to it as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It teaches them the data analytics part, the perseverance, and kind of weighing 2 options in decision-making, which decision-making is huge because a lot of times, especially today, there's not a whole lot of things that kids get the opportunity to make decisions on unless their parents allow them to. And I think that the more we can allow our kids to make decisions, the better they can become at making those decisions.
Oh, spot on. Love that.
So I want to spend a few minutes just having giving you the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of the organizations you're involved in, and your podcast, and how people can connect and learn more about those things and maybe get involved.
Sure. Thank you so much for that opportunity. So as I mentioned before, I was a K-12 educator I still am, but worked was a classroom teacher for many years, and then spent some time teaching at Central Piedmont Community College full-time, teaching adults because my doctorate is in adult education. I mentioned those because that's have led me to where I am now. And about 6 months ago, I took a jump and went full-time into doing some entrepreneurship. So I'm personally running 2 organizations or 2 businesses. One is called the .consulting, THEDOT, consulting. And through that, for my consulting and coaching work, I am helping K-12 entities, meaning public schools, charter schools, private schools, integrate computer science across curriculums. So much of what you and I, John, you and I have talked about today, I work with teachers and parents and students to see how computer science is a part of what they're doing and how we can leverage their knowledge and their concepts using technological processes, software, hardware, et cetera. And then I also do a lot of corporate training through my consulting business where I apply much of what we've talked about today, the out of the box thinking, and really applying so let's say, for instance, that it's Excel that you need to use in your business. Let's really walk through that process of jumping over the hurdles of the perceived ease of use so that you can find it easy to use and really elevate your work. So I do that in my consulting. And then what happened really very naturally for me, over the years, I have been doing workshops and things with young people. So part of what emerged out of my consulting and coaching was my nonprofit organization, which is called the Dottie Rose Foundation. Dottie Rose is my grandmother, who was a huge influence in my life, and just still, she's with me every day today. We just had an amazing bond and partnership. Of course, my parents are amazing as well, but there's a special bond between a granddaughter and a grandmother. And my mom was an only child, so I spent a lot of time with my grandmother and my grandfather, but she taught me a lot about community and passion and faith and family. And so I wanted to honor her, so that the foundation is in her name, but we focus on supporting young girls in computer science. So the work that I'm doing in the school system, I take over to the nonprofit, and we do camps, workshops, mentorships, some short classes, and we provide different opportunities for young girls, and I focus a lot on the upper elementary, middle school age, because middle school is a bit of a lost nook there, that especially as a high school teacher, I often saw where the girls somehow would be very passionate about it in elementary, and then we hit hormones and the lack of really good content in middle school, that by the time they hit me in high school, I would have to really do some persuasion to get them into my classes. So this summer, we actually have a full lineup of camps, and all of our camps are related around things that are real world centered. And then we incorporate the technology. So my best example, and the one that I'm most passionate about that's going to happen, is a camp called Constructed by Girls, Wearable Fashion, where the young ladies are going to learn all about the science behind creating a garment, meaning the chemistry behind the fabric and how they're created. And then they're going to learn the 3D technology to create a pattern. And then that pattern is going to be produced. So they will actually have a physical garment that they will then have a fashion show to show off their work. But we're going to talk a lot about the technology behind how, because the fashion industry is really, really using technology to its advantage. And we're going to talk a lot about how that's working. So that's the nonprofit. And then one of the other pieces that I work with is I'm a founder and board member of Carolina Women in Tech. And we focus on the adult woman really looking to find her way and her space in leadership and in technology. And we offer all kinds of events. Usually once a month, we'll have a lunch and learn, or we'll have a breakfast. And we are located here in Charlotte, hoping to expand soon. But that organization I'm so proud of. We have really grown it from the grassroots up. You can find us on Meetup for that one. And then
Okay. I'll link that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Carolina Women in Tech or you can also find us under Charlotte Women in Tech. And then the last thing that you mentioned was my podcast, which takes me back to my roots of when I was in high school and I thought I was going to be DJ Sharky Sharon. But the podcast is called Lady Tech Charmers, and it was grown out of the fact that I am a co-host with two other women, Paula Okone and Caitlin Sellers-Castevens, and we focus on talking about our field and getting more women to leadership positions, interviewing and chatting with women that have forged the journey before us, things that they're doing, encouragement. It's really a place to empower and educate women, and it's been a joy and a delight to do. And you can find that one at ladytechcharmers.com. And then my nonprofit is Dottie Rose Foundation.org.
Okay, and I'll link all those up in the show notes as well. And just a plug for the podcast. I've listened to several episodes. They're really well produced and well done. You've had some great guests on as well, and also like the show that you did a live show, or I guess it was sort of live from the podcast conference that you went to, and that was really good as well. So you don't have to be a female to listen to the podcast.
No, and we do it as exactly. You're exactly correct. I mean, no, and I don't want to shun boys because I live in a household of boys. Even my dog is a boy. What we want is to give a voice and for people to hear what is happening in the world of tech and how that women are making an influence, and hopefully that will influence males and females alike to want to take this career path. I mean, I'm sure you can agree with me, John. I mean, it is so much fun. One of the things I love about our discipline in our career is that it changes and it's different and it's challenging. I never feel when I wake up that I am not going to have a great day.
No, I think you're absolutely right. That's one of the things about, at least what I've found with my career in technology, is that there's something different every day. You're not going to get bored.
You're for sure not going to get bored because it's changing so fast, but it's just, but there's so many different nooks and crannies that you can go down and figuring out where you fit in the world, or how. The one part you asked me a little bit about how it became a passion of mine, and I've been thinking about this as we've been talking. And part of what really became my passion, it was I began to realize how much using and integrating technology changed the way I performed in my work, how I interacted with the children, how I was able to provide a more robust learning experience. We talk a lot about in education about differentiation amongst young people. And when you're teaching technology, it's like learning English or you're learning a new skill set, right? So you're learning something. So whenever you're doing that, you really need to repeat it at least 7 times. We like things in sets of 7s as humans. And so let's say, for instance, that I'm teaching about what a loop is, or I'm teaching an if-then statement. You really need to practice that several times, and you need to practice it in different examples, not the same example over and over. And what I realized is I could leverage technology to help me teach that better by doing videos, by having my children or my students, I call them children, I'll call them my babies, but having my students create the videos, or having them use, even if we were in SAS, teaching them HTML to actually showcase their results. So they would run it in SAS, and then we'd export it and put it up onto a website. Really taking that, not thinking about it so much as a fear factor, but thinking, how can I use this to make my job easier, better, more fulfilling and exciting? Because teaching is exhausting. I mean, you're on all day long. And I began to realize that I couldn't do that. I couldn't sustain that. And part of what I needed to do was help me find ways to have the kids help and then leverage what we had. I mean, we have these great devices of iPads. How can I use them? Instead of being bookmarks.
Yeah, that's super good, and I think everybody needs to find their passion, and I'm so thankful that you found it in technology. This has been really good. Any last pieces of advice for our tech leaders out there that you want to give before we end the conversation?
I would say my best advice is to keep going, keep trying, and this is the other thing that I really, really encourage. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. So take the time every week to invest in yourself, to either watch a YouTube video, take a little online class, join a webinar that keeps you in check with what's happening in our field, in our industry, so that it's not so overwhelming to try to have to learn something brand new. If you can keep yourself astute on what's happening, even if it's like just watching a little YouTube video on the latest macro development for Excel, or how to do a VLOOKUP, or how to use a function better, any of those things that could help you do your job better, but also keeps your skill set present, is really important. Because if we don't use it, we lose it. And then when you try to learn it again as adults, it's so much harder to try to learn it than it was if you just done little bits over time.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I know after I built my first app, it went live the day my daughter was born in October 2010. And after my son was born, my middle child, I just said, I'm just going to stop building apps. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I just left it alone, even though I had a lot of apps that were still out there getting, generating pretty good revenue on the side. And then Apple made a change and said, all your new apps have to have, some new compliancy and have to be, built on a different version. I said, I'll just pull it back up and I'll update them all and get them in there. And I haven't touched an app in 4 years. So I thought it would be the same. And it was totally different. It was so frustrating. It was difficult for me to learn. I was like, man, if I just would have, opened these every, 2 or 3 months and just went through it, this would have been a piece of cake.
Yeah. And that's it, because it does change so quickly. And you have the core ability. It's just, again, the tech changes. So you have to understand that tool. And give yourself some grace, because it changes so quickly, you have to give yourself a little bit of time to learn it. And if you don't get it on the first try, it's okay. Just try again. And, allow yourself a little bit of like, oh, okay, I'm going to get this, but I'm going to walk away right now and I'm going to go eat a piece of chocolate, or I'm going to have a cup of coffee, or I'm going to go walk around the block, or whatever it is. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to try again.
That's really good advice. And thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I think the audience got a lot out of this. And, it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It's been a pleasure, and I enjoy listening to your podcast and all the advice. I will say this. I was one of your gentlemen that was on that was a coder that moved into management. I totally geeked out on that episode. I cannot remember his first name now. It's blocking me, but I listened to it twice because oh my gosh, I so understand what he's saying. So anyway, it was really good.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Dr. Sharon Jones, and check her out on Twitter, LinkedIn. I put her websites up there for the Dottie Rose Foundation, as well as the .consulting and the Carolina Women's Tech Group. Those are all linked up in the show notes at geekleader.com, so check those out and head on over and listen to the Lady Tech Charmers podcast. Great show, great host, and give that a rating and review in iTunes, as well as sharing the Geek Leader podcast and giving us a rating and review too. That would be awesome. Thanks so much. Have a happy Easter.